Hello everyone, I'm Eddie and welcome back to Let's Pair series where we talk about upcoming changes in GraphQL Codegen by The Guild. In today's episode, we're looking at the improvements we're making to interface generated types in normal and federated setup. So let's start. Now let's look at GraphQL interface. Here we have an example schema where there's a query that returns media, and media is an interface. And we have two implementing types, one called booked and the other one called movie. Now let's take a look at the resolver map for that schema. On the screen right now are all important resolvers related to the media interface. The first one being the media query, as it can return the media mapper, which contain the information about a media item. Then we have the media interface is an object containing a meta resolver called resolve type. This takes in the media mapper and must return either book or movie, being the implementing type names. Next up, we have implementing types book and movie. They have a meta resolver called isTypeOf. These resolvers also take in the media mapper and they must return true or false. All these resolvers are important in how we can resolve a media interface. Now let's look at how we can resolve an interface. An interface is a special type where there could be many implementing types. Therefore, we have to tell the server which implementing type a payload is, otherwise there will be runtime error. There are three ways where we can tell the server which implementing type it is, and we're gonna explore it next. First option is to use type name when returning the mapper. Take a look at this example. We can see that the media query is returning mappers with type name in them, declaring whether the mapper is a book or a movie. When we do it this way, we don't have to implement other meta resolver like resolve type or isTypeOf. Let's look at option 2, using interface resolve type meta resolver. The purpose of this resolver is to return the name of the implementing type. In this example, our media is returning a mapper with a media type being book or movie. Our resolve type return that media mapper.media type directly to distinguish the type of the payload. This is a very contrived example. In the real world, we may have an int or a differently formatted media type. This is where we can use resolve type to turn that into the right book and movie string. Finally, option 3 is to use the implementing types isTypeOf resolvers. The purpose of these resolvers is to tell which is the concrete type of the payload. Here's an example. We are returning a mapper with media type similar to option 2, but instead of using resolve type resolver, we create isTypeOf in the implementing types. And instead of mapping to a string, we return true or false based on which type the meta resolver is attached to. Similar to option 2, this is a very contrived example, so media type can be directly used to compare against the implementing type names. However, in a real example, you may have to compare an int or a differently formatted string. That was how GraphQL interface works in a normal setup. Next, we're going to look at how interface works in a federated setup. GraphQL interface in federation is Similar to the non-federated version, the only thing we have to keep in mind is how the special meta resolver called resolve reference interacts with our three options. Now let's take a look at our example in the federated extension. Here we have marked our interface and our implementing types with the key to mark that they can contribute these fields and types. Let's take a look at our resolver map for the federated setup. Here we have the base resolver map for option 2, where we return the mapper with media type, and in our media interface we use resolve type to distinguish whether it's a book or a movie. Since media is a federation entity, it may have resolve reference, which can be used to jump into this subgraph to resolve the types from a different subgraph. And we can notice that this returns the same payload as the media query from the same subgraph. The only difference between these two resolvers are which subgraph they come from. After that, the resolve type or the is type of resolvers will get called the same way. Now let's take a look at some rules around meta resolvers. The first one being interfaces on a normal GraphQL setup may only implement resolve type and no other resolvers, even if there are fields in the interface. In a federated setup, the interface entity may only implement resolve type and resolve reference meta resolvers and no other fields. And finally, only abstract type members, this being interface, implementing types, or union members, may implement is type of. This is applicable to both normal GraphQL setup and federation setup. These are the rules that we will integrate into Codegen generated type in the next major version as a breaking change. We've just looked at how interface works in a normal and a federated setup. Next, let's look at how we are changing Codegen types to support these rules. Here's our first example. In this schema, we have a media interface and it's implementing types book and movie. These are all non-federated types. We are going to use this example to see the differences between the generated type for our first rule. Interfaces may only implement resolve type meta resolvers and no other field resolvers. Let's look at the current behavior. On the right hand side, we have the media interface object. When we try to autocomplete, we can see that TypeScript is suggesting us that we can implement resolve type or ID resolver. This doesn't comply to our first rule. Let's compare the existing behavior with the next version. We start by installing the alpha version. We run Codegen again. And when we try to use the new type, we can see that only resolve type may be implemented. All right, let's look at our rule number 2. Federation interface entities may only implement resolve type and resolve reference. Let's turn media, book, and movie into federation types with the key directive. Now, when we co-train with the current version, we can see that there is no resolve type on media interface. Let's co-train with the alpha version. And now we can see that interface media may implement resolve reference resolver. And finally, let's look at our rule number 3. Only abstract type members may implement each type of meta resolver. Abstract type member are implementing types or union members. We will notice that product is not an abstract type member because it's not part of any union or implement any interface. Let's look at the existing version. It still has the is type of meta resolver, which doesn't follow a rule number 3. Now let's look at the alpha version. Now we can see that product no longer may implement is type of. And that's it for this episode. We have just gone through how GraphQL interface works and how Codegen is improving the generated type for a normal and federated setup. I've put all the PRs in the video description so you can have a review. And finally, thank you so much for following along, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more content like this in the future.